What does this mean for India's role in the world in a third term of Narendra Modi? How should we, as an international audience here on the show, understand India's potential shift in foreign policy?
The belief is it's changed, it hasn't. So our policy hasn't changed. We still want Russia and China to be apart. Europe is priority number 2. Our own household is priority number 1. And it does not suit us to have a Russian-Chinese compact, and we will do whatever is required to break that up.
Biden congratulate Modi on X, Twitter. What's your immediate reactions about the few countries that are stepping up to take a very quick congrats, India?
This is The Global Gambit.
India's election has been a month-long, 5-week-long example of just sheer human dedication to democracy. And one of the things that all democracies have to do is navigate a world where there are plenty of non-democracies. And the other thing that happens with an election is potentially a change in foreign policy. Narendra Modi, who has just been confirmed as the reinstated Prime Minister of India for an unprecedented third term, has made incredible, shall we say, milestones in India's foreign policy and become very, very highly in demand amongst various nations, be that from Putin's Russia to Biden's America. What does this mean for India's role in the world in a third term of Narendra Modi? Is India going to continue to have as much of a staunch impact as it has in the past few years? Or could it see a little bit of a shift? Could we see it slow down? And which countries will be vying to be top of India's biggest interests list, so to speak? All of this and more coming up as we're joined by Abhijit Iyer-Mitra, who is an expert on various things India related and has focused on things from limited wars and nuclear thresholds, but also democracy. And as you'll see in part 1, a great voice on Indian domestic affairs. Abhijit, it's great to have you back for part 2.
It's great to be back, Piotr. It's always fun talking to you. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's jump straight into it, I think. How should we, as an international audience here on the show, understand India's potential shift in foreign policy after this election? Or there isn't going to be any? There
isn't going to be any. There hasn't been in the last 70 years. Since independence.
No, I'm just going to say, well, okay, thanks so much for coming, everybody. That was a great chat. See you next time. No, I'm joking. Hasn't been a change in 70 years. Well, tell us why.
And I'll tell you why. The belief is it's changed, it hasn't. And it's the implementation of it that varies. Britain gave us a very, very simple foreign policy. First, what the British Empire did was it ended all the internecine warfare that happened in the Indian subcontinent and pushed it to the periphery. So China was one periphery, but it wasn't really a periphery in that sense, in that it was Tibet, and by this time the Qing dynasty was in full-blown collapse. Yes. Afghanistan was always an active border. And then you had Burma, which then extended and became part of the British Empire. So we had a border with Thailand at one point, and Malaysia was anyway part of the British Empire. So it sorted out a lot of the historical problems we had. Independence changes all of that. You have a return to the kind of internecine fighting we have, because you have Nepal and Bhutan, which aren't hostile, but Pakistan, which is intensely hostile, and at that time Bangladesh was East Pakistan, which was again intensely hostile. Because of the British Empire, we ended up with an immigration problem, because we had huge emigre communities in Singapore, in Malaysia, and in Burma. And in 1956, there was a full-on kicking out of about 1 million Indians from Burma, about 700,000, close to 1 million Indians from Burma, who all got kicked out, their properties got seized, and they got sent back to India. But one thing that we inherited from the British very, very clearly, which never changed, was 1, you guard the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean, and 2, you see to it that no power ever becomes dominant over the Asian landmass. In other words, you see to it China and Russia never come together ever again. And all of Indian policy. And, Nehru actually did a very good job at this. People don't realize this. They would criticize him for being too leftist, too anti colonial, too virulently anti British, etc., etc. But he did a very good job. He went to the USSR and he used to keep telling Khrushchev, "Oh my God, you guys are the world leaders. You're so fantastic. And remember, we're a continental power. We're not like Britannia or Japan that has to worry about sea lanes. We have to worry about land invasion, because land invasion is what happens all the time." So he goes to the USSR and tells them, "You're fantastic. Lead the anti-colonial world order." Why? Because Britain's so thousands of kilometers away. Russia at that time, the USSR at that time, was just literally about 100 kilometers away from the northern border, with the little Wakhan corridor, that little fake part of Afghanistan that separates Tajikistan or Turkmenistan from the northern, which is now technically occupied by Pakistan, but at that time wasn't. And he then goes to China and says, "Oh, these very arrogant Soviet pricks, ignore them. Who does Khrushchev think he is? You, dear Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, you are the great leaders of Asia. You need to forget all this Western communism, and you need Asian anti-colonialism led by you." And he creates the Bandung Conference as a deliberate attempt. Everything he did was to stir up trouble between the Russians and the Chinese. Now, the thing was, he was very good at it. The Sino-Indian War of 62 actually contributed massively to the Sino-Soviet split that happened a few years later. He was very successful at it. The problem was, because he hated Americans and he had this very British upper class belief that Americans are low-born parvenus with too much money and no class, as opposed to the Brits who have all the old money and the nobility. He generally believed himself to be an extension of the Mountbatten family, which is technically by extension the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which is by extension the Queen. He genuinely believed he was part of that class. And so, American, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you may be a billionaire, but I have class and you have none. So there was this huge class condescension. He never explained that policy. Indian and American policy were 100% aligned. They were also very, very badly explained. Now, if you take that forward to today, where the West has huge problems with Russia over Ukraine, it's the exact same policy. We have to keep Russia away from China. We have to incentivize both of them for it. We need to prevent them from getting even deeper and deeper and deeper in each other's arms. We remain a continental power. The difference today is, like I said, in the execution. It is not done with rancor. It is not done with hypocrisy. It is not done with this sort of petulant anti-colonial language. It is done very, very professionally. Now, if you go back to the 50s and 60s, because Nehru had his cabinet full of actual anti-colonial believers, especially our ambassador to the UN, a guy called Menon, who was a complete dunce. He used to go just say nasty things. He loved the sound of his own voice. So think of him as the Luciano Pavarotti of foreign policy, except he couldn't sing half as well as Luciano Pavarotti could. He used to rub people up the wrong way. He had a great opinion of himself. And so he used to keep saying nasty things about Britain and America, while they would go around coochie-cooing with the worst kind of dictators in Africa who were slaughtering millions of their own people just because they were anti-colonial. And remember, the Chinese at this point were carrying out massive famines and things like that, targeting their own people, which they had no problems with. The Indian government had no problems with. What you see today is the same thing is done, but without any of the rancor, without any of the indiscipline. In fact, indiscipline in those days was so bad that when the Soviets invaded Hungary, Nehru instructed that man Menon to vote against the USSR. He refused and he voted with the USSR. And because Nehru had his own class buddies and things like that, zero action was taken, despite the fact it was disastrous for Indian foreign policy. Because a few years later, we went and invaded Goa, and the Americans turned around and said, well, you guys invaded Goa. Why should we do the same to you that we did to the USSR over Hungary? Goa was anti-colonial liberation. The Portuguese were holding on to it, and we had to get rid of them because Salazar, the dictator at that time, wasn't willing to negotiate about it, etc. He surprisingly wasn't a racist. He had a policy of miscegenation, which was based on all the Portuguese become mestiz, for them to marry all the native populations and erase any class, caste differences and racial differences. And so the people of Goa would actually feel Portuguese. Uh, didn't matter. It's still the invasion went ahead and things like that. So our policy hasn't changed. We still want Russia and China to be apart. Europe is priority number 2. Our own household is priority number 1. And it does not suit us to have a Russian Chinese compact, and we will do whatever is required to break that up.
So we've had a few leaders release some of their, responses or congratulations. We've had Biden congratulate Modi on X, Twitter, calling, the friendship quote between our nations is only growing as we unlock a shared future of unlimited potential. So the US really, I think, doing what they have been in quite a few years in recent years, and as the Chinese have grown in more confident in their foreign policy, their wolf warrior diplomacy, really trying to pull, as I always keep saying to people, India's trying to be pulled or pushed, and America's trying to pull India closer, and the Indians have always retained their strategical autonomy versus the Chinese who are pushing India towards not necessarily alliance, but definitely deeper strategical partnership with the United States. And the Americans are definitely trying to, I think Biden is definitely trying to take advantage of that. We've also seen Putin congratulate Modi. Those two have a unique relationship, I think, which is perhaps better than the two countries, should we say, state relations. Their personal relationship is quite strong, and Putin was quoted as saying they'll continue to expand in all directions, the relations. And then, not that it's as, say, the level of influence, but the UK, Rishi Sunak congratulated Modi on X as well, and actually put some of the congratulations in, I believe it's Bengali, I'm not entirely sure. But that's, what's your immediate reactions about the few countries that are stepping up to take a very quick, thanks and congrats, India? Does that say something about the priorities that they have for India versus India's priority for them?
This was Hindi, not Bengali. Rishi Sunak, the rest of Rishi Sunak's.
My apologies. That's my limited. Can only speak so many languages.
Yeah. This is pro forma, right? It's you do it every time. There's nothing big about the tweets or anything like that. I think the only tweet Indians were really thrilled about was Giorgia Meloni, because we joke about how Giorgia Meloni actually has a huge crush on Modi, and Modi has a crush on her.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Call her Bhabhi, which is effectively we call her Bhabhi, which is sister-in-law.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, we do that. And when she broke up with her partner, what was his name, Gianluca or something like that, trust me, the Italian press didn't cover that breakup as well as the Indian press did, because sister-in-law is finally coming home, kind of thing. And curiously enough, she was the first person to congratulate him, and I think she's the first person that he quote-tweeted and thanked for her congratulations as well. And they also play it. Those two know exactly what's happening, and they troll all of us, because at the the G20 summit? Yeah, Georgia took a selfie of the two of them and put it as #Melody Modi.
Oh yeah, no, it's fantastic. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Definitely better than her ex, which was his name's Andrea Giambruno. I much prefer the romance between these two state leaders. But sorry, please continue.
Fake romance, just done to troll us, but anyway. And these things are pro forma. What I'm looking forward to, people don't realize this, because now that things are so bad with Putin and things, they won't even extend congratulations to him, and they'll call him all kinds of names and things. This is one of the things I don't like, that sometimes the West loses diplomatic nicety when it decides to go after someone. They, of course, say, why should we be nice to somebody like that? But India always observes these forms. So we find it quite alien. The real thing will be to see how Biden actually manages the different silos within his government, many of which do not like India. For example, the Defense Department, we do not have problems with. State Department as a whole, we don't have problems with. But there are several silos within state, which we know the directors of those departments are very woke. They have certain agendas that we know of because of their political inclinations. We suspect them at the highest levels in India of running lots of agendas and funding lots of things that essentially amounted to election interference in India. Uh, we're not going to make a big story out of it, but it might become something later on. And I really want to see how that relationship is managed. That said, because the last 10 years have seen a very good management of that policy. Remember, we never got sanctioned or anything like that for our continuing ties with Russia. Why? Because we didn't do anything with rancor. We went and we explained it very, very well to the Europeans and the Americans. So even if at public summits you sometimes get some think tankers get a bit upset with the Indian position, you won't see that upset reflected in official positions anywhere in the US or Europe. And all it needs, because it's been so well managed for the last 10 years, it needs very little accretions. It's almost an autopilot right now. So there's nothing much to be done. The only thing we're worried about is the State Department, really.
Okay, interesting. And what about, therefore, the countries which will not be quick to share their, congratulations. I have to be honest that I think Meloni has been a breath of fresh air in Europe. A lot of people thought she would be a diehard right-wing, extremist, but she's actually been quite conformist to some of the more prevailing themes like supporting Ukraine, European strategical autonomy, which I think we massively need to do, and why I think Macron is sort of more on the right side than others who think, we need to get into bed too much with the Americans, like the Brits. I think, working closer with India, for example, on certain issues would be useful. But what about the other countries that are more of a nefarious concern to the Indians? Obviously China, Pakistan. What about the Taliban, and generally sort of non-state actors as well? I'd be rather curious how you think the Modi government coalition is going to navigate these other entities.
Right. So let me start from the West and Afghanistan. I think we've decided at some point that, the Taliban are wonderful, democratic, progressive, feminist people who we support completely. We are pussyfooting around allowing them to take over the embassy, but for all effects and purposes, because we were running the Afghan embassy out here. We stopped payments to them, we stopped electricity to them so that they'd get out and the Taliban could take over officially. There's a lot of Taliban people who come to Delhi for their medical treatment. We keep seeing them at different hospitals. We know who they are. It's entirely funded by the MEA. And it's important to realize that in the last 70 odd years of Indian independence, we have had fantastic relationships with the Afghans for 67 of those 70 years, except for the first 3 years when the Taliban took part in 2001, where they actually believed Pakistani propaganda. Till then, they hate the Pakistanis as much as we do in that sense. We don't as a state hate them, of course, but my story is like, if America can turn Al-Qaeda fractions into moderate Islam fighting Bashar al-Assad, then I think India can definitely turn the Taliban into progressive, democratic, feminist patriots fighting against the military rule of Pakistan, the expansionist designs of Pakistan. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. And that relationship is bound to grow. The mutual interests in that are so great that the negatives simply almost disappear. Pakistan has essentially, Pakistan's one great lever against India was the Kashmir insurgency and nuclear weapons. Now, the nuclear weapons were a shield for the insurgency because at no point of time would you risk all-out war with nuclear deterrence. But now that the insurgency has well and truly ended, there will still be terrorism. It's not an end to terrorism because remember, terrorism is sporadic. Insurgency is a consistent state. The insurgency has ended in Kashmir. And so Pakistan's levers against India are no longer there, which is why India hasn't been talking to Pakistan for the last, what, 6, 7, 8 odd years. The Pakistanis don't know what to do. They have no ace card, they have no trump, they have nothing to play with, they have nothing to bring us onto the negotiating table with. We're just pretending they don't exist. Their goodwill with every other country seems to be running out. The Chinese no longer take them seriously, particularly because the Chinese genuinely thought that this Pakistan China economic corridor would be something welcomed by Pakistan for its own industrialization. Pakistan went out of its way to sabotage that, right? um, we can discuss why in a separate podcast. The Americans decided, this Pakistani game. Oh, if you don't give me this, if you don't love me enough, I'll go to China, who's my other lover, and maybe he'll give me something. The Americans aren't up for it anymore. And Pakistan is in a state of utter ruin at the moment. So Pakistan's not, it's nowhere near our top 10 priorities at all, except vigil on the border, because both the Punjab insurgency died about 20 years back, but the Kashmir insurgency is well and truly dead. So finished. China is a problem we have never known how to deal with, and we will still not know how to deal with it. The one change that the government brought out in its previous term, and it only started in 2019 after the election victory, was China had this tactic of salami slicing Indian territory. They'd come about a kilometer in every year, and because India hadn't constructed any, to use Israeli settler lingo vis-a-vis the Palestinians, facts on the ground, because we hadn't constructed facts on the ground, and we believed that lines on a map are indelible. We stuck to that. We never built up infrastructure. All of that stopped in 2019. It was precisely the building of all the road and air infrastructure out there and clear markers of borders that brought about the Galwan clashes and things like that. And that's fine. It means that in theory, we've got to let go of a lot of land that we believe is ours. But it also means that you've kind of reached a status quo. It's literally like Gandalf in the Three Rings saying, "Thou shalt not go any further," kind of thing. What he does with the Balrog. So that's what's happened out there. But other than that, we have a fantastic trade relationship with China. China is our biggest trading partner. It is a very colonial trade because they take all kinds of raw materials out of India and they send us back finished goods. We don't know how to change that till we industrialize, but we don't know how to industrialize. In the previous podcast, we discussed all the pitfalls to it and things like that, the roadblocks to it. But I think it's a great deal of caution with China, but it's a managed relationship, as opposed to Pakistan, which was too much of a revanchist, revisionist state, almost like North Korea. China, strategically very, very dangerous, but it's a managed relationship. Is it warm? No, but we manage.
So, two subsequent follow-ups on each of those then. You didn't really touch upon the Taliban interesting very much. And I think what we've seen between India and Pakistan is a sort of, well, it was unusual actually, the sort of the drawdown that the Indians did. I'm thinking of the 2022 missile incident where the Indian Defence Ministry has simply admitted that it was an accident, that missile that launched in March, I believe, was a mistake. And the Pakistani government essentially publicly condemned it, but that's as far as it went, and everyone could breathe a sigh of release that this didn't escalate. What about the notion of, a more constructive leadership in Pakistan? We've had people on the show before, and I've got a strong community of Pakistani viewers who are obviously big supporters of Imran Khan. What's your take there? Could a leadership towards him, I know it's a very unlikely scenario, would that help relations? Not necessarily long-term systemically speaking, but do you think, if we saw an improvement in the leadership, that could lead to a sort of reduction in the heat between the two at the moment?
There's a very perverted support for Imran Khan in India, which I think is a bit misdirected, because he was such a revisionist in the Pakistani context, trying to remove the military from power, initially, he was very much the army's man, and there was a whole load of derision about him in India. But the moment he decided to start taking on the army, India's greatest desire has been to see a democratic Pakistan. But the problem with the democratic Pakistan is, how do you become democratic when your military, industry, and land are controlled by an extremely small feudal elite, which will never let go of that power? Right? And that has been the entire problem. Dual citizenships, where they look at Pakistan as some kind of a, grazing ground for cattle, while they enjoy the ill-gotten gains in Dubai or London or Boston or New York or what have you. It doesn't work. So on one hand, we used to ridicule Imran Khan till he took on the military. Once he started taking on the military, there was genuine admiration for him. Is he coming out? I think not, because I think he overplayed his hand. There's been previous templates for him to base his taking on of the military on. The AKP in Turkey, for example, had several previous incarnations under Necmettin Erbakan and people like that, who got essentially couped and removed by the army. Erdogan did something very smart. He went on emphasizing your EU membership, even though he knew it wasn't going to happen. He made it such a national cause, which was Kemal Mustafa Ataturk's ultimate dream, that the military could not remove him even if they wanted to. And finally, he got so powerful that he purged the military. The thing was, he played a long 20-year game. Imran Khan wanted to condense that into a 3, 4, 5-year game. He should have really done his homework better. Did he have the best of intentions? Yes. But unfortunately, in that kind of situation, if you play your cards wrong, you are not coming back. There is a reason Nawaz Sharif is never going to become prime minister again, and only Shehbaz Sharif will, because Nawaz Sharif tried to sack the army generals when that coup ultimately happened against him. It's the same with Imran Khan. Imran Khan, I think, went a lot further, and I don't think they will ever allow him to come back to power. Does it set up social tension? Yes, but are Pakistanis really going to go against their own army? I doubt that very much. So,
Okay.
could things change if Imran came back? Yes. But is Imran coming back? I think he's crossed too many red lines for the Pakistani military to ever let him back.
Yeah, I would agree. Which I think is unfortunate, given the sort of that's what the people want, and that's largely what I support. But China. We cover China a lot on this program, as I think anyone who does anything to do with geopolitics, China will be omnipresent in the background, at least from a Western US perspective. And we try to obviously diversify. But, what do you think about that, audience? Who do you mainly think is a concern for India? Let me know with a comment. Do you agree with what Abhijit is saying? And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell, and check out part 1. We've got a lot of stuff on the channel about India, about Bharat, and I know I probably mispronounced it, but that's sort of my effort to get used to this, is to even talk about it.